Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Sustaining Sustainability. I'm your host, CB Bhattacharya, Professor and Director of the Center for Sustainable Business at the University of Pittsburgh. This week, I'm joined by R. Edward Freeman, University Professor at the University of Virginia, based out of Charlottesville, Virginia. Professor Freeman is best known for his work on the topics of stakeholder management and business ethics, as well as his award-winning book, Strategic Management, A Stakeholder Approach, first published in 1984 and reissued in 2010 by Cambridge University Press. Ed, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, CB. It's a real pleasure.
Ed, could you begin by briefly describing stakeholder theory for our listeners who may not be familiar with the concept?
Sure, it's the simplest idea in the world. I never thought anybody would find it even interesting, quite honestly. It says that every business always has and always will create and sometimes destroy value for its customers, its suppliers, its employees, its communities, and the people with the money. And that to build a great business, you have to figure out how to create value for all five of those, and maybe there's some others as well, but all five of those, and get them going in the same direction. Because the interest of customers is connected to the interest of employees, is connected to the interest of shareholders. So it's a very, very simple idea. I grew up poor on a farm in Georgia, and yet we knew that we had to deal with the people that could affect us or the people that we could affect. It was sort of life 101 and applied to business.
Do you think more people are recognizing the need for a paradigm shift away from the conventional shareholder-centric approach now than before the pandemic?
What's happened is we've had a series of events from the global financial crisis, which has increased things like inequality. We have the global warming crisis, and you add the pandemic and a concern with racial equality onto that, and what you find is paying more attention to shareholders isn't going to help and solve those problems. And more people are understanding that. If you go to the Just Capital website, they're keeping count of what the Business Roundtable companies who signed a pledge to take stakeholder capitalism into effect rather than shareholder centric approach. And Just Capital is actually holding their feet to the fire, saying this is what they're doing. And there's a special section of the website that says this is what the companies are doing with respect to the pandemic. How are they creating value for their stakeholders now? So I think it's a little too early to tell, but you combine all these things, and there's no question that the stakeholder-centric approach to business is sort of on the rise. And I can tell you, as somebody who's been arguing for this for 40 years, there was a long period of time when no one cared.
We recently celebrated the 50th anniversary of Milton Friedman's op-ed in the New York Times, where he famously proclaimed the social responsibility of business is to make profits, plain and simple. So, what would you tell him if you met him today?
Well, I'd say several things. I'd say because he's kind of a hero of mine in a way. Businesses have to make profits. He's absolutely right about that. The idea that profits are bad or etc. is really kind of a dumb idea. It's like the idea that look, I got to make red blood cells to live, but it doesn't follow that the purpose of my life is to make red blood cells. Businesses must have profits at what our finance colleagues in business school call the weighted average cost of capital, the WACC. They got to have profits at the WACC. But it doesn't follow that the purpose of a business is to make as much profits as you can. Furthermore, if you focus on one stakeholder, you're going to miss what's happening to the others, and they're connected. So, I've often said, even if all you care about is making as much money as possible, How are you going to do it? You're going to have great products and services that customers want. You're going to have suppliers who want to make you better, employees who are inspired and want to do great things for your companies, communities who want you. And if you do those things, you might make money. Friedman's view in today's world, there's just too much uncertainty. It's too complicated. There's nowhere to hide. And so we have to adopt a different story about business, a different narrative. And I think it's this multi-stakeholder narrative. But it doesn't mean profits aren't important. It doesn't mean shareholders are not important. It's an and. It's stakeholders and shareholders. It's purpose and profits. And those are the things that we have to remember. And as business school professors, CB, I think those are things we have to teach.
So we have heard from leaders across a wide range of industries, but you were one of the rare academics to appear on the show. Could you discuss how universities in the US and business schools in particular are handling this crisis from a pedagogic standpoint? Do you see a need for curricular reform?
We had about a week and a half to figure out last spring how to take our courses online. Now, at Darden, we don't lecture. It's all Socratic discussion or case oriented discussion. And having a case oriented discussion online with 60 people is really very different than giving a lecture or having a case discussion in a room where all the nuances of body language and etc. are all there. I think we did a pretty good job, in part because our students really tried hard. And that's my experience everywhere. Is the students are trying to make it work. But online is not as good for the most part as in person. Especially online is not as good as in person if you want to have a relationship with your professor or with your fellow students. So it's tricky. We've adopted a hybrid model where we have some people in the class and some people online. The ones in the class cycle in and out so everybody gets a chance. But we've also let our professors choose whether they'll be online all the time or do the hybrid model. Now, do we need curricular reform? Oh, geez, absolutely yes. I think we're, for the most part, teaching people the wrong stuff. Now, look, you've got to teach finance and accounting and decision theory and those things, but you also need to teach people ethics. You need to teach them about the environment and what sustainability is. I think you need to teach them some evolutionary theory so that they can think critically. I think you need to teach them some creative arts so they can exercise their creative imagination. Because without those things, we're going to try to solve these new, difficult, complex problems with an old idea that's not going to work very well. So I think there's a huge need for curricular reform in business schools, and I know some are talking about that.
So, in your book, The Power of And, I mean, and you alluded to the power of and before, you discuss some real world success stories that disprove the idea that there are unavoidable trade offs between acting responsibly and succeeding financially. Could you share an example or two for our audience?
Well, for instance, I think one of the most striking examples, and we don't know a lot about it, but we talked about it in the book, is a company like CarMax. Used car salesman used to be the paradigm of the sleazy business person. What CarMax did was it said, wait a minute, is there a better way to do this? Is there a better way to do that so that people can rely on the information that we give them? It's not this back and forth haggling, etc. And you can really smooth out this process, make it ethical, and they've succeeded financially. I think that's one example that you might not think about if you thought about this just as in the old story, because they do succeed financially. CB, people want to know, if I act this way, is it guaranteed that I succeed financially? And what I say to that is no. If you want a guarantee, you better buy a refrigerator, because that they come with guarantees. If I want to succeed financially, should I try to maximize shareholder value? Well, the answer to that after the Great Recession, the global financial crisis, is clearly no, because a lot of people tried to maximize shareholder value and went completely bankrupt. We talk about New York Life in the book, as well as a company that's been around for 100 plus years. And of course, they don't have shareholders, they're a mutual company. But they spend a lot of their time trying to figure out how their mission, which is to do the best they can for their customers' financial future, how that fits into pretty much everything that they do. There are other companies like some of my favorites, Whole Foods, the Container Store, the Motley Fool. These are companies that are founded on ethics, on paying attention to stakeholders, and of course they're doing well financially. So I think this idea of there's a trade-off between acting ethically and succeeding financially, if you believe that, you're just in the grip of this old story that tries to separate ethics and ghettoize it somewhere and say, well, that's not about business. Adam Smith, the father of, I want to say capitalism, though he never used the term, Adam Smith understood that if you had markets, and in those markets were not people with a sense of justice, it wouldn't work. So ethics and business go together. They've always gone together, and we need to remember that again.
Now, you're featured in a new documentary, Fishing with Dynamite, which is focused on stakeholder capitalism and shows how we build it back better. What does it mean to you to build back better? And, how will this help manage other global crises such as climate change?
Well, I think build back better means making, to me, means making business better, and making business better by taking the stakeholder approach, by not giving in to trade-offs. Trade-offs are easy; they're always there, and trying to get beyond trade-offs is hard, and it requires creative imagination. And build back better means working with other institutions in society, so that we see more things like multi-stakeholder initiatives. We see business working with government and with NGOs to solve, really difficult problems. And we see innovation happening, because ultimately we will not solve global warming without substantially more innovation. Build back better means giving people a chance and some hope, especially those people who've been shut out of the system. And it means businesses have to figure out how to help the least well off groups in the communities where they operate. If we do those things and we don't try to engineer it too much from the top, I'm worried about that, because the engineering from the top almost always leads to a kind of one size fits all totalitarianism in some cases. So if we don't build it too much from the top down, but we encourage businesses to work together with governments and in NGOs and other stakeholders, I think we really can build it back better. And I think that's actually what's starting to happen.
So, Ed, we are coming to the close of our time, and I'm going to ask you for two calls to action. First, what is the most important message you want to convey to companies during the COVID-19 era?
That's easy. Don't waste this opportunity. Don't waste this opportunity to really dig down and figure out what your purpose is. and realize that purpose doesn't live in the mission statement or the annual report or the mouse pad and coffee mug. Purpose lives in the day-to-day systems. Purpose lives in the way you treat employees and customers and suppliers and communities. And to drive that purpose forward, to figure out which of these societal issues are you going to make a difference on. And this is the time to do that.
And then what call to action would you make to our other listeners?
I've said this often. I think we can be the generation that makes business and capitalism better. We have to demand that of the as customers. We have to demand that as employees. We live in a world now, CB, where it's troubling that you and I can't disagree without thinking that each other is immoral. We need to get much better at having conversations precisely where we disagree. And I would call on people to say, when you start thinking about who you can affect or who can affect you, your stakeholders, when you think about your purpose in life, how you want to make your mark, that's a pretty good place to start those conversations.
Professor Freeman, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you for your time and coming to us today.
Thanks, CB. I really enjoyed it.
And this is your host, CB Bhattacharya, saying goodbye and join us for the next edition of Sustaining Sustainability.
And before I sign off, I do want to say that this podcast is made possible by the help of my colleagues, Leslie Marshall, who's the Associate Director of the Center for Sustainable Business, and Alyssa Martinek, who is the Sustainability Coordinator of the Center for Sustainable Business. I'm your host, CB Bhattacharya. Bye-bye.